I have been patient, Lord. I abide the presence of heathens, so there might be peace.
Britannia is the first of the Total War Sagas, a new type of historical Total War game that focuses on a smaller timescale. In this case, things kick off in the year 878 AD as an uneasy truce has settled following the Viking invasion of Britain. Now, the Saga games are meant to act as a kind of stopgap between larger Total War titles, so don't expect too many huge leaps forward with Britannia. In fact, it's using a modified version of the Total War Attila engine. But there are some things worth knowing, including its release date, April 19th, by the way. And I've played a couple of hours of an early version of the game, so with that in mind, here's everything that I've learnt so far. Number 1, you can expect a shorter campaign here than in a typical Total War game, but that being said, a long victory should still take around 200 turns, I was told by the game's lead designer. The map itself, which is made up of England, Wales, Scotland and Ireland, is also meant to contain a similar amount of detail to the entire Total War Attila campaign. Obviously it's a much smaller landmass, but the amount of detail, the provinces, the factions, the travel time between areas is actually meant to be comparable. Number 2, and within that landmass there are 10 playable factions to choose from across 5 different cultures. During my hands-on demo I was able to play as the Gaelic faction of Mead, a kingdom located at the centre, or the middle, hence Mead, of Ireland. The Gaelic factions have a unique trait called legitimacy, which actually ties into one of their victory conditions too, and it grants bonuses for owning specifically Gaelic territory and for building alliances with other Gaelic factions and then honouring them when required. Early on in my campaign, a smaller neighbouring Gaelic faction that I was allied with was attacked by a significantly larger Viking force, and I was given the choice to break my alliance, but didn't, in the hopes that it would improve my legitimacy, which I did, but this choice ended up defining the next 2 hours of my playtime as my ally was quickly defeated, and then I struggled to defend myself. Being legitimate, it turns out, isn't always easy. We're yet to find out what the other kind of cultural traits will be, but I like this one. It gave my campaign a sort of natural direction to take, I guess. Number 3, unit recruitment is different. So to reflect the shorter time frame of Thrones of Britannia, your available army roster isn't going to change dramatically throughout your campaign. There are a few unit unlocks that can be researched, but none of them are linked to buildings this time around. However, the big change here is that all of your armies will be using global army recruitment to acquire new troops. Whereas the basic units can be recruited in bulk, your more veteran forces can only be recruited once or maybe twice before becoming unavailable for several turns. So building up an army of decent units is actually quite a lengthy process, and losing that force will feel extremely costly. During my 2 hours of playtime, I found that I'd bulk out most of my armies with, well, peasants, I guess, and then relied on the veteran units to actually deal the damage. This seems like the obvious way to at least start a campaign. Number 4, mustering. So when you do recruit a unit, it will immediately be added to your army, but at 25% of its total strength. The idea here being that it takes time to recruit and train new soldiers, but they don't all just show up at exactly the same moment, which I think works, actually. It allows for some interesting tactical decisions as you weigh up whether you can afford to take an undermanned force into battle, because you might potentially lose that veteran unit that's just been recruited, or perhaps it'd be smarter to spend a couple of turns within the walls of a city that you own, allowing your units to fill out first.
Into battle!
Number 5, character development. If you've played Total War Rome 2 or Attila, the base stats and the traits of your generals will look kind of familiar in Thrones of Britannia. But one thing that has changed, however, is the way in which they level up. With each new rank, you can add an additional follower to your character, with all of the different options being available from the get-go. So you might put a point into the champion follower, for example, making your general better in combat and improving their command. Next time they rank up, you can once again put another point into the champion follower, giving a slightly different bonus this time, or choose another follower entirely. Characters can also be assigned as governors for your various provinces, which is something Total War lost with the Warhammer games. And here's an interesting one: loyalty is back too. Which means, yes, if a character's loyalty drops too low, they may rebel against you, which can be a bit of an issue if they're leading one of your larger armies on the campaign map. Loyalty can be managed through the family and politics screen through marriages, or, well, let's be honest, assassinations. And you can also choose to gift an estate to someone to bump up their loyalty, and you'll receive a number of estates with each province that you control. So yeah, marry, buy off, or murder seem to be the 3 main options there. Number 6, war fervor. I hope I said that right. Your population's appetite for conflict will change depending on how long you've been at war with another faction, providing bonuses if handled correctly and penalties if not. Interestingly, this does go both ways. A faction that's been at war for too long will grow tired of it. You'll start to get penalties to your public order, your armies will become less effective, etc. But a faction that hasn't been warring enough will also grow restless. There's penalties there too. Number 7, victory conditions. There are 4 main types, including the conquest victory, which is perhaps the most straightforward as it requires you to hold a certain number of settlements. You know how it works, it's in the name really. Paint the map, your colour, you win. The fame victory is a little more complex. It's achieved when you receive a certain amount of fame, which is represented as an actual number in game, and fame is increased through loads of different things actually. Earning gold, researching tech, taking part in wars, completing certain events. Basically everything that you'll already be doing as part of your campaign. If you do it well enough, your faction's reputation will increase, and you can win. That's the gist of it. Then there's the Kingdom Victory, which is unique to each faction based on their history. Mead, for example, is asked to unify Ireland eventually under a single king, and there's meant to be a bunch of in-game events that tie into this too, giving it a bit more of a narrative-led feel as well. And finally, there's the Ultimate Victory. If you complete one of the long versions of any of the other victory conditions, an end-game event of some sort is triggered, and if you survive it, you'll win. I'm not sure what this is, but I suspect it will probably involve Vikings. Number 8, diplomacy is being reworked slightly. Whenever you enter an alliance with another faction, you'll automatically receive a trade agreement with that faction, which just makes sense, really. Also, and this one is a little more vague, I'm afraid, Creative Assembly told me that they put a good amount of work into the way that the AI factions act on the campaign map. More specifically, they're meant to better reflect the trait that defines them on the diplomacy screen. So if they have the steadfast trait, for example, they should actually stick to the alliances that they form and be much less likely to betray other factions. I was told that the developers are aware that this hasn't always been the case in previous Total War games, and it was much more of a priority this time around. Number 9, and finally, it is important, I think, to remember that Thrones of Britannia is running on some version of the Total War Attila engine. It plays a lot more like that game than it does like Total War Warhammer, and if I'm honest, I found that I did miss some of the changes that I've become accustomed to since spending so much time with Warhammer and Warhammer 2. The battle AI is different, the game doesn't look as nice, I'm sorry, it doesn't. The campaign map is actually quite messy and difficult to read at a glance when compared to the newer games. And yeah, it is fantastic to have a new historical game to play, don't get me wrong, and I really like the setting for this one, but it does feel dated. That's really worth thinking about before purchasing this game. Are you okay with it feeling a bit more like Total War Attila, essentially? Alright, that's probably a good question to leave this video on actually. Thank you very much for watching this first look at Thrones of Britannia. You can expect a longer Let's Play from us at some point before its release in April, and if you do have any other questions about my time with the game so far, do let me know in the comments and I'll try my best to answer them. I spoke to the lead developer a bit and yeah, played 2 hours of the game. So there's a bit more that I haven't mentioned in this video. If you have any questions, do ask. See you next time. Cheers very much. Goodbye.
It is the Kingdom of Wessex! And my divine rule.